A woman on trial for murder, a servant girl, quiet, poor, solitary. It wasn't the crime that pulled them in. It was who she was, or rather, who she wasn't. She had no husband to vouch for her, no father to shield her honor. She had no name worth recalling. Folks just knew her as the girl from the mayor's house, or that silent one with eyes that lingered too long. The saloon was hushed that morning, its usual clamor of clinking glasses and raucous laughter replaced by a tense quiet, as if the town held its breath. Word had spread fast. A trial was underway, and the woman at its center stood alone, her fate sealed before the gavel fell. The gamblers abandoned their cards, the barkeep set down his rag, and the townsfolk drifted toward the courthouse, drawn by the lure of scandal and the promise of a show. She had served in the household of Mayor Cornelius Vane, a man as wealthy as he was ruthless. Now he was dead, poisoned, they claimed, and she was the only one in the room when he drew his last breath. She didn't weep when they hauled her from that grand house in chains. She didn't beg or cry or swear her innocence. She kept her gaze low, walked steady, and let them hiss and damn her name. Now she sat on a worn bench by a rusted iron stove, hands clasped, her hair tied back in a severe bun that showed the bruises still fading along her neck. The prosecutor strutted like a revivalist in full fervor, brandishing a small vial in his hand. "This here," he bellowed, "is belladonna, the devil's herb. A single drop can stop a man's heart in his sleep." And that's exactly what she did. The crowd muttered, nodded, sneered. No one asked why the vial was found in the mayor's own desk. No one noted he'd been frail for months before that night. No one questioned what a servant girl, who didn't own a proper pair of boots, would gain by killing the man who paid her wage. The judge, a longtime ally of the deceased, observed with the cool distance of a man torn between loyalty and duty, tilting heavily toward the former. Her court-appointed lawyer had barely spoken all morning. He mopped his brow, coughed, then rose. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I don't believe there's any solid proof." "That's enough," the judge cut in. "Sit down." A few spectators snickered. Her eyes swept the room slowly, not seeking aid, just noting how fast folks turned cruel when it cost them nothing. An old baker turned her face away. A stable hand who once grinned at her now dodged her gaze. The sheriff, who'd once offered her protection from her master, stood by the door as if she were already condemned. The jury didn't deliberate that day. They didn't need to. Everyone had their own version of the truth, and none included Clara. As the gavel struck and the judge called a recess before sentencing, the woman was led through a dim back hall. She didn't fight, but across town, in the shadows of a near-empty saloon, a man with dust on his coat and a revolver heavy at his hip sat, his drink untouched. He'd been there since first light, and when the gavel's echo reached the wooden streets of Hollow Rock, he rose. They called it justice, but it reeked of a stage play. When the trial resumed after a short break, the townsfolk filed back to their seats with fresh vigor. Some fanned themselves, others munched on treats, as if they'd returned to the opera house in Abilene. This show had no music, just the slow unraveling of a life no one valued until now. The woman was brought back to the courtroom, chains clinking like wind chimes in a gale. Her face was pale, unreadable. She hadn't spoken since her arrest. The prosecutor leaned in, stoking the fire. He spun tales of a resentful servant, scorned by a master who kept her out of Christian kindness. He painted her as envious, cunning, bitter, a woman who listened too much and spoke too little. "She didn't even cry at the mayor's death," he said, voice climbing. Someone in the back murmured, "A guilty one." No one asked how a woman earning $3 a week could buy poison. No one questioned why Mayor Vane's will was rewritten days before, leaving nothing to his distant sons and everything to an unnamed heir whose identity remained secret. The court-appointed defense said nothing. He was a man who prized his standing in town over truth. His voice, when it came, was meek, almost ashamed. "There's no direct proof," he mumbled, barely audible. "Perhaps we should consider, well, it might have been an error. Maybe a heart ailment." "Sit down, Mr. Harrow," the judge snapped. "We've heard enough speculation." The girl didn't flinch. She'd grown used to silence. When she was 9, her mother died in childbirth. Her father drowned in liquor before she turned 13. Life taught her to vanish. Walk softly, speak less, smile only when required. She'd lived in 6 houses before landing in Mayor Vane's mansion, each crueler than the last. Vane was no different. His kindness was venom cloaked in decorum. He called her, girl, no matter how many years passed. His hands strayed where they shouldn't. He struck her once for dropping a china plate, then paid her extra the next day, saying it was for her trouble. In private, he was a threat. In public, he was a saint. That made her the liar. She'd thought of fleeing once. But to where? Who would shelter her? What man would believe her word against Mayor Cornelius Vane? None of it mattered now. The judge cleared his throat and surveyed the courtroom with weary eyes, eager to be done. Unless there are any final witnesses, he began. The room stilled. The doors creaked. No one entered. Not yet. The judge nodded. Then this court finds the defendant. Before he could finish, the courthouse doors burst open. A boy stumbled in, panting, hatless, shirt soaked with sweat. It was the town's stable hand. He clutched a crumpled paper. I found this, he shouted, holding it aloft. It's from the mayor. Hidden in his desk, behind the lining. Gasps filled the room. The judge signaled the bailiff forward. The letter was seized and passed up. The courtroom held its breath. The judge read in silence, then folded the letter and set it down slowly, glancing at the jury. It changes nothing, he said coldly. The letter is unsigned, unverified. We proceed. And just like that, hope evaporated. The girl didn't look up. She'd learned long ago that truth was unwelcome in certain rooms, and this was one. The courtroom cleared as dusk settled over Hollow Rock. The trial paused for the night, but no one expected twists come morning. The girl, still nameless to most, would be found guilty, sentenced, and forgotten. The town had already moved on to supper and gossip. She was returned to a cramped cell behind the sheriff's office. The cot reeked of mildew. The stone walls were cold, the only window a narrow slit too high to show more than a sliver of sky. Still, she sat upright, back straight, hands folded. No one visited. No one brought her food. Even the sheriff, who once nodded to her in town, avoided her eyes now. His deputy, young, red-haired, still green, watched her from afar, like she was a caged beast that might lunge. She didn't lunge. She didn't speak. She just waited. In town, talk swirled without her. At the saloon, over whiskey and chuckles, regulars echoed the prosecutor's words with conviction. At the church, they prayed for justice, though whether that meant punishment or mercy, no one could say. At the Vane house, the mayor's sons huddled to discuss their inheritance. No one spoke for her. Not the maid who saw the bruises, not the cook who heard the fights, not the doctor who treated Vane's failing heart but stayed silent when called to testify. No one. They all had something to lose, or so they told themselves. Their jobs, their peace, their place in a town that rewarded silence over truth. But the girl had nothing left to lose. So she sat quietly in that cell, recalling every night she went to bed hungry while the mayor feasted with guests. Every morning she scrubbed floors only to be told she'd missed a spot. Every time she flinched at footsteps behind her, too scared to turn. She'd accepted that this town would never recall her kindness, only the rumor of her crime. Then, just before midnight, the sheriff's office door creaked open. Heavy boots, deliberate steps. The deputy stood, hand on his holster. A figure entered, dusty coat, low-brimmed hat, revolver resting easy at his hip. "Can I help you?" the deputy asked, voice cracking. The man didn't answer. He walked to the cell and stopped a few feet away. She looked up for the first time. Her eyes narrowed. Recognition flickered, brief and faint. He tipped his hat. "Evening," he said, voice rough as gravel. "Didn't expect to find you behind bars." She said nothing. "I came for answers," he added. "But seems I came for something more." The deputy cleared his throat. "Sir, visiting hours." The man turned his head. The deputy froze. Silence returned. The stranger looked back at her and spoke softly. "I'll be at the saloon come morning. If you want out of this, I suggest you wait." Then he turned and left, the door swinging behind him. She didn't sleep that night, not from fear of what was coming, but because for the first time, someone had stepped into her silence and lingered. By sunrise, whispers drifted through hollow rock like morning mist. "He's back," the bartender muttered, wiping the same glass 3 times. "Didn't think I'd see that bastard again." "Who?" asked the piano player, hands frozen above the keys. The bartender leaned in, voice low. "Jace Harrow." The name sent a shiver through the saloon. Jace Harrow wasn't just a man. He was a legend. The kind mothers warned their sons about when they dreamed of posses or outlaws. He'd once been the fastest draw west of the Black Hills, a bounty hunter, a drifter, a shadow. But he vanished years ago. Some said he was dead, others that he'd lost his mind. A few swore he'd ridden into a storm and dissolved like smoke. Now he was back, sitting in the saloon's corner, hat low, nursing a cold coffee. The townsfolk kept their distance. Even the sheriff, passing by, ignored the revolver at Jace's side and the way his eyes tracked everything without moving. Nobody approached. Nobody dared, except the old pianist. He shuffled to the corner, hands trembling just enough to betray his nerves. "You here for her?" he asked, voice a whisper. Jace didn't look up. "I'm here because I owe a debt." The pianist nodded, though he didn't understand. "Folks say she did it." "Folks say a lot," Jace replied, calm and low. "She ain't said a word in her defense. That's 'cause no one listened when she did." The old man glanced around, wary of eavesdroppers. "You planning to speak for her?" Jace lifted his eyes, cold, clear, certain. "I plan to make this town remember what happens when it forgets who it used to be." Back at the sheriff's office, the girl stood by the barred window, arms folded. She hadn't been told about the stranger's visit, but she remembered his voice, his silence, and something deeper. Something like the echo of a life she might have had if fate had been kinder. She recalled a name, not his, not yet, but one she'd overheard long ago through the walls of Mayor Vane's study. "Jace Harrow's a necessary evil," Vane had growled. "He kills, but he doesn't rob. He protects, but only for a price in blood." That name had stuck in her mind ever since. The name of a man Vane hired once to scare off a rival. A man who vanished after one bloody night no one dared mention. A man who now sat waiting. Not far from the courthouse, the tailor flipped his sign to "closed." At the bakery, the owner burned the morning's bread, distracted by a figure in a dark coat crossing the square. At the saloon, the bartender poured another drink, handshaking. The town had declared her guilt before a verdict was read. But now, a name they'd buried deep had resurfaced, carrying its own judgment. The sun rose higher, but Hollow Rock's usual bustle slowed to a wary crawl. The saloon should have been lively by midday, filled with chatter and clinking glasses. Instead, it sat in an eerie hush, as if the town held its breath. Only the swinging doors creaked as folks peeked in, glanced at the man in the corner, and slipped away. Jace Harrow hadn't moved since dawn. He sat in the far booth, hat shadowing his face, hands resting atop the table, close but not too close to the revolver at his side. He hadn't ordered another drink. He hadn't eaten. He just waited. The piano stayed silent. The bartender polished already clean glasses. Every so often, someone entered, curious, bold, or foolish, and froze at the sight of him. A few whispered his name, only to be hushed by those who knew what he could do. By noon, the sheriff stepped inside. He walked slowly, shoulders stiff under his badge, trying to act like the law still mattered. "Harrow," he said with a nod. Jace didn't respond. "You passing through?" Silence. The sheriff cleared his throat. "We don't want trouble." "Then stop making it," Jace said, low and even. The sheriff shifted. "If this is about the girl." "It is. She was tried fair and square." Jace looked up, eyes sharp. "Nothing about that trial's fair, least of all that courtroom." The sheriff opened his mouth, then closed it. He wasn't cruel, just worn down by years of looking the other way. "And Jace Harrow wasn't a ghost you challenged." "I ain't here to break your law," Jace said, voice like steel drawn slow. "Just here to remind it." The sheriff nodded once and left, tension trailing like smoke. Back in the cell, the girl sat on her cot, head bowed. She heard the whispers through the walls, the way voices quaked when they said his name. She recalled how Vane spoke of Jace Harrow like a weapon he'd once wielded but couldn't control. She remembered a night years ago when Vane yelled at her for asking questions. Jace had been there, silent as ever. After that, the yelling stopped for weeks. Then one morning, Jace was gone. Now he was back. The town didn't know how to handle him. Too dangerous to provoke, too enigmatic to trust, too quiet to ignore. He didn't threaten. He didn't shout. But his stillness unnerved everyone. Even the air seemed to shy away from him. As the courthouse bell tolled 1 o'clock, the saloon doors swung wide. The room tensed. Jace stood. Every eye followed as he walked slowly to the door, spurs barely clicking on the wooden floor. He paused once, just before leaving, then turned to the room. "Today, you'll watch a woman hang for something she didn't do," he said. And not one of you lifted a hand. No one replied. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked out, and behind him, a silence deeper than gunfire settled over Hollow Rock. The courthouse filled early. Men removed their hats. Women clutched their shawls. Children, dragged by curiosity, were hushed and told to watch. The trial had ended the day before. All that remained was the sentencing. The judge sat high, robes crisp, voice rehearsed. A Bible lay on his bench, unopened for years. The jury had delivered their guilty verdict before supper the previous night. Now the town awaited the formal sealing of a fate they'd already embraced. The girl was led in, still chained, still silent. She wore the same plain dress from her arrest, now loose on her frame. Her cheeks were sunken, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. She looked less like a criminal and more like a ghost trying to recall what it meant to be seen. She was told to stand. She did. "Do you have any final words?" the judge asked, more from protocol than care. She shook her head. The judge began the sentence, his words heavy, ornate, laced with legal weight and scripture, as if poetry could hide the ugliness beneath. He spoke of justice, the sanctity of life, how this court took no pleasure in such rulings. Then the door opened. The heavy creak stole every eye. Bootsteps followed, slow, deliberate, echoing like distant thunder. Jace Harrow stepped inside. The judge paused mid-sentence. The sheriff half rose, then sat. The girl didn't turn. She didn't need to. She knew. Jace walked down the center aisle. No one dared stop him. No one whispered his name. He reached the front and stood just behind her. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain his rhythm. "This court finds the defendant guilty." "She's my wife," Jace said. The words hit like a hammer on stone. Gasps swept the room. A child whimpered. Someone whispered, "That can't be true." The judge narrowed his eyes. "What did you say?" Jace's voice stayed calm. "I said, she's my wife." "You're interrupting official court business." "I'm correcting it." The judge bristled. "This is a court of law, sir, not a saloon for tales." "Then let the truth speak," Jace said. He reached into his coat, slowly, carefully, and pulled a folded paper. "Marriage license, filed in Dust Creek, 3 towns over, 3 years ago." The sheriff, pale and sweating, took the document. He read it once, then twice. He looked at the girl. She showed no emotion, only blinked. The judge scoffed. "Even if true, and I doubt it, it has no bearing on her guilt." "It has bearing on why she was left alone," Jace replied. "Why no one stood beside her." He turned to the crowd. "You watched her suffer and did nothing." No one met his gaze. The judge, flustered, slammed the gavel. "This is highly irregular." Jace stepped closer to the girl and said quietly, "You're not alone anymore." For the first time in the trial, her hands trembled. She wasn't crying, but something in her stillness cracked, not broken, just opened. For several seconds, the courtroom froze. The gavel sat crooked on the judge's bench, unused since Jace spoke. The sheriff held the marriage license like it might burn him, and the jury, so certain hours ago, now stared at the woman as if seeing her anew. She stayed quiet, but her stillness had shifted. No longer the silence of abandonment, now the silence of protection. The judge leaned forward, trying to regain control. "Even if this marriage is valid, it doesn't absolve her of murder. This trial is about justice, not romance." Jace stepped forward once, just once. That was enough. "I'm not here for romance," he said. "I'm here because you lied. All of you." Murmurs rippled across the benches. "She begged for help before the mayor died," Jace said. "I was there. I heard her. I saw the bruises. I saw how he kept her working through fever, through pain. I left because I couldn't kill a man for something the law should have stopped." He looked around, voice low and sharp. "But you never stopped it. You watched, you gossiped, and now you call yourselves just." The judge's face reddened. "You're not an officer of this court. You have no authority here." "I don't need authority," Jace replied. "I have truth." He turned to the sheriff. "You remember that cut on her lip? You saw it. You asked if she wanted to press charges." The sheriff swallowed hard and nodded slowly. "She said no. Said it'd only make things worse." "She was right," Jace added, "because it did." The judge tried to interrupt, but Jace spoke first. "I came back not to rescue her, but to remind you what you buried." He pulled another paper from his coat, an old medical report, signed by the town doctor. The bruises, the broken rib, the internal bleeding a year prior. More gasps. The document passed from hand to hand, reaching the judge, who read it in silence. "She wasn't angry," Jace said. "She was surviving." He turned to her then. "Not the town, not the court, just her. You wanted to disappear so bad you forgot you mattered." She looked up, her eyes locking with his. "I left because I thought it was better to disappear than stay and burn everything down. I was wrong." The courtroom held its breath. Then a voice rose from the back, thin, shaking. "I saw the mayor hit her," said the baker's wife. Heads turned. "He used to make her kneel while he drank," she added, now crying. "I never said anything." Then the maid stood. "She cleaned his chamber pot when she had a fever. I begged him to let her rest." He laughed. Then the old piano man spoke. "I saw the bruises on her arms 3 years ago. I thought it wasn't my place." The courtroom shifted. Whispers of guilt and shame grew louder than any gavel could silence. The judge sat back, expression hollow. The truth was heavier than the sentence he was about to deliver. Jace didn't need to say more. He'd already won, not through violence, but through silence, finally broken. The courthouse emptied slowly. No verdict was read that day, no sentence given. Instead, the judge, once so proud, rose and announced a recess pending review of new evidence and witness accounts. His voice cracked as he spoke, like he no longer trusted the courtroom he commanded. The girl was led back to her cell, this time without shackles. The deputy who escorted her kept his head down, hands trembling slightly as he opened the iron door. She didn't ask questions. She just sat quietly. Across town, Jace Harrow stood at the edge of the square, staring into the distance. He didn't return to the saloon, didn't seek food or rest. He waited. As he waited, people passed, some pausing, unsure whether to thank him, others pretending not to see him. By nightfall, the doctor arrived at the sheriff's office, a file in hand, guilt etched on his face. "I lied by omission," he confessed. "I treated her more than once and never filed the proper records. I feared the mayor's wrath more than I feared God." The sheriff, his voice quieter than usual, said only, "You're not the only one." The next morning, the town felt different. No one said it aloud, but the name Jace Harrow now carried weight again. Not as an outlaw, not as a killer, but as something worse for Hollow Rock. A mirror, reflecting all they'd chosen to ignore. Jace sat outside the jailhouse, hat low, as people passed and whispered his name. Not with fear, but with unease. It wasn't his gun they feared now. It was what he knew. Inside, the girl sat still, but her thoughts raced. She recalled the first time she heard Jace's name, whispered by Vane during a dispute with a rival. "I'll bring Harrow back if you don't shut your mouth," Vane had snarled, like summoning a demon. Later, she'd heard the staff speak of Jace with awe and dread. A man who did what was needed, but only if it was right. A gun for hire, yes, but with his own code. She'd seen him only a few times then. Quiet, watchful, a man who never looked at her like she was nothing. But he vanished, just like that. Now he was back, claiming her as his wife. She didn't understand why. She didn't know if it was true. But part of her, the part that hadn't dared feel in years, wanted to believe someone had seen her long before the courtroom did. Outside, the sheriff approached Jace. Judges called for the case to be reopened, he said, with proper testimony, witnesses. Jace didn't move. Too little, too late. Maybe, the sheriff said, but maybe not for her. Jace looked up. The sheriff hesitated, then added, "You really married her?" Jace shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Matters to some of us." Jace stood. "Let the town do what it needs to, but make sure when it's done, she walks free. And you? I'll be gone by then." The sheriff didn't stop him, just nodded. As Jace turned away, a voice rose behind him, small but steady. "She deserves more than freedom." He turned. The piano man stood in the square, old and stooped, but eyes clear. "She deserves a place, a name, something that lasts longer than shame." Jace tipped his hat. Then maybe it's time Hollow Rock remembered who it used to be. The reopening of the trial was signaled by the church bell. Not by law, but by the will of the people. No official decree announced it. No notice was posted. But the town came anyway. They came because they'd seen something unexpected. Truth that didn't scream, didn't threaten, didn't beg, just stood its ground and stared back with hollow eyes and bruised wrists. They came because the girl no longer felt like a stranger. She felt like someone they'd failed. The church opened its doors, the courthouse no longer trusted. The pews filled slowly, first the baker and his wife, then the maid, the cook, the piano man, the stable hand. Each took their place, as if to say, "We were wrong." Jace Harrow didn't sit. He stood near the back, arms crossed, watching. She entered with the sheriff. No chains, no bowed head. Her steps were cautious, but her spine was straight. When she sat on the witness bench, something shifted. She spoke for the first time since her arrest. "I didn't kill him," she said. Her voice was soft but firm. "I wanted to, many times, but I didn't." She looked around the room, not in anger, but with a sadness that made grown men squirm. "I begged for help. I prayed. I stayed silent because I thought it would keep me safe." She turned to the judge, now seated without robes, just a man. It didn't. One by one, the townsfolk came forward. The maid testified to Vane's temper. The cook spoke of nights the girl went hungry. The stable hand confirmed he'd seen Vane strike her more than once. Even the judge, shamed by what he'd allowed, admitted he'd heard rumors but never asked questions. By day's end, no verdict was read. There was no need. The truth had returned, not in fury, but in faith, in the belief that redemption, though slow, still had a place in the West. Outside, the sun sank low. Jace waited at the edge of town, horse saddled, coat over one shoulder. She found him there. "I don't remember marrying you," she said plainly. "You didn't," he replied. She blinked. "The papers are real, but they were never filed." "Why bring them?" "Because they'd believe me before they'd believe you." She studied him. "So you lied for me?" "No," he said. "I lied with you." A breeze caught her dress. "You can stay," he added. She hesitated. "And be your wife." "You don't owe me that," he said. "You don't owe me anything." He turned to mount, but she stopped him with one word. "Wait." He paused. "I don't want to stay in Hollow Rock," she said, "but I don't want to walk alone anymore." He met her gaze. For the first time in years, she saw something in a man's eyes that asked nothing of her, only offered a place to rest. She stepped forward. He offered his hand. Together, they turned from the town that had once called her nothing. They didn't ride far, just far enough for Hollow Rock to fade into dust and sunset. No destination named, no plans made, just two souls moving forward, quietly, steadily, without chains. At dusk, they stopped at a roadside inn beyond the ridge. A wooden sign swayed in the wind, letters faded but readable. Clara's Rest. Inside, the tavern was nearly empty. A single lantern cast an amber glow. An old woman behind the counter looked up, eyes sharp, then softened when she saw the girl's face. "Room's yours if you want it," she said. "No questions." Jace nodded and paid. They sat near the fire, not close, but not far. He ordered food, simple stew and cornbread. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she'd eaten a proper meal. Not since before the arrest, maybe not even before that. She sat, hands folded, until the food arrived. Then, slowly, she reached for the spoon. Jace didn't watch her, he just ate. No words, no questions, no expectations. But when she finished half her bowl, he glanced over. Want the rest? She shook her head. No, thank you. He pushed his bowl toward her anyway. She hesitated, then took a bite. In that small gesture, something unspoken passed between them. A truce, a beginning. Not love, not yet, maybe not ever, but something solid, something true. She set down the spoon and leaned back. You really were going to leave after the trial, she said. Yes. Why? Because I didn't think you'd want a reminder of that place. She studied him in the firelight. Maybe I don't, but I do want something to look forward to. Jace didn't smile. He rarely did, but his eyes softened. What do you want? She looked at her hands, once so steady, now trembling just enough to feel real. A place I can walk into without whispers, she said, a name I can speak without shame. He nodded. And a table, she added. That made him pause. A table. One where someone saves me a seat, where I don't have to earn it. Jace reached across the table, not to touch her, but to straighten the crooked spoon. Then we'll build that, he said. No promises, no vows, just truth. The old woman brought tea without asking. She'd seen many travelers pass through, but few with eyes so tired and quiet. As the fire crackled low, the girl looked out the window. The stars were out. She was no longer anyone's servant. She wasn't the girl with no name. She was someone who'd stood trial alone and walked away with someone who saw her not as broken, but as beginning. That night, in a place called Clara's Rest, two souls shared a table built not from wood or trees, but from silence, survival, and something that might one day be called love. Sometimes, all a person needs is for someone to say, "You're not alone." If this story touched you, drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt unseen, like she did? Or had someone like Jace, who saw you when no one else did? Subscribe to the channel to catch more stories that matter. Your voice belongs here, and we'll be waiting for you in the next one.